And we're good. Right, brilliant. Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Tumble Hub. My name is Rob, and today I'm joined by Joey Gamper Cuthbert. How are you doing today, Joey? Thank you for being here.
I'm good, thank you. I'm excited to be here and have this conversation.
Me too. When so we've been planning this for about a month or so now, but um, I can remember getting this all into schedule and thinking, right, this is going to be great because this is so some of the stuff that we're going to be talking about today, I remember having my mind blown even when I started thinking about it for the first time. So, um, I'm really excited to get started. But before we do, could you tell us a bit about yourself, just so we can kind of, get into the frame of where we are and what we're going to be talking about?
Yeah. So I'm Joey. I'm a former athlete. I was a cheer athlete. In fact, I first learnt to cheer at London Cheer Academy, which was run by AEC. So I think Rob and I have known each other for a really long time. I trained professionally as a dancer, so I have a professional background in dance. And I went on to be a coach and then a gym owner, and then involved in the national teams for Team England, with the development of the adaptive abilities teams. And I now chair the board at Sports for England. But through that kind of through all of those roles, I've developed I developed an awareness around the lack of safeguarding that was going on within our sport. And that led me professionally to develop an interest in safeguarding management, safeguarding education. Um, and so I now have a consultancy called Squad Safe that specifically speaks to cheer and dance, sports and activities, art forms that don't necessarily always have the right or good information that speaks specifically to them. And I come at that both from now a safeguarding educated perspective, but also from the lived experience of having been an athlete, a dancer, a gym owner, um, which I think brings brings it more to life when you're having conversations.
So, what do you do in your free time?
Uh, Another job.
Yeah. Um, yeah, you rack up the miles, don't you? So, you're probably like one of the busiest people I know. So I can't believe we even managed to tie you down for half an hour. So I'm really glad you're here.
So outside of all of that, I also and have my own consultancy. I also I'm the head of engagement for a hip hop dance theatre company, and I oversee they have an academy that works with young, underserved, marginalised communities. So yeah, bringing loads of different perspectives into the work that I do, and hopefully to the conversation today.
All while getting 8 hours sleep a night, right?
Sure.
All right, okay. So let's introduce the topic then today, and actually, you named this, and I think it is very poignantly named. So today we're going to be talking about positions of trust, tumble, and safeguarding. Um, I love the role I get to fulfill as a tumble coach. I love working with young people. I love being able to be part of a journey that can often be part of a wider sort of perspective in regards to teams, but also very personal because you are working with people on their own personal goals and aspirations as well as the team one. Um, However, it also means then that I suppose that we are susceptible as tumble coaches to potentially seeing more, and being able to be there for them or there for young people more in terms of safeguarding as well. Does that kind of ring true so far, Joey?
Yeah, absolutely. You know, we're in a really privileged position as coaches that we're not their teacher, we're not their parent, we're not their friend, we're a trusted adult, and yet we sit in this space where we're seeing them in a completely different context, and we might be that one touch point, that one person that they feel that they can trust and speak to about something that's going on for them. So it's a really privileged position. It's also, you know, when you think about it, it's a huge responsibility. And so, you know, it's important that all coaches, but particularly tumbling coaches, feel supported and equipped to do that role. Yeah,
Yeah,
and sometimes I don't think we think about the gravity of it too much. We're just doing it, we're being that person, we're being that trusted person, but we're not. Yeah, and it's important that we know what we're doing and feel supported to do that.
yeah, I mean, we're at the end of the season now, aren't we? And we're just about to hit tryouts, and it's always, and I suppose this is quite well placed for many reasons because we're in that kind of grey area now where our season is competitively done, and we're getting ready for tryouts, which means you've got a whole bunch of athletes who are really excited about the prospects of next season, and they're aging out or they have skills now that they didn't have last year, and they're hoping that they might make the next team, and that's all very exciting. But then we're also in the other area where athletes know that their journeys are coming to an end, they're moving, they are going to university, or, or for whatever reason, they're no longer going to be cheerleading anymore. And so, as a coach, I feel like I've been quite emotional this week because there's a lot of athletes that are now, going on to their next phases of life. Um, and that, as much as I've been involved in their life for a number of years, they've been ever present in my life 2 times a week for, 5 or 6 years. And we get, I've had a couple of letters this year this week from athletes who are leaving, some athletes that I've had more to do with than others for various reasons. And you read the letters and you're kind of, like you said, you take for granted how much of an impact you have had on them.
Mm.
But I also think if there are any athletes watching this, um, don't take for granted the impact you have on us because, in many cases you become our muses, you become our inspiration. You think about tumble passes and you think, oh, this athlete will be able to fulfill that tumble pass and they'll go perfectly with that athlete. It's gonna look beautiful. So I do think that it's quite a sad time of the year as much as it's going to be something that we are going to be celebrating. I think I went slightly off tangent, but you kind of got me in the moment, and I feel like it was something that needed to be.
Yeah.
So
Yeah, well, it's a special relationship, isn't it? Between, the coach and athlete, and those can be particularly intense when it's tumbling related as well. You're potentially working through mental blocks with them or challenges for the first time, and those can often bring up things for them that are going on in other aspects of their life. So you have that close relationship. And, one of the things that I think we've talked about is how we create before, just you and I, is how you create appropriate boundaries so that you are being able to be supportive, but you're also protecting yourself, protecting that young person within that relationship. Um, but yeah, it's special.
let's talk. I think maybe could we talk about that a little bit as well? So especially with tumble coaches, and we've already sort of mentioned that tumble coaches perhaps have, or in my opinion anyway, I think tumble coaches have the capacity to be, um, for a lot of athletes, one of the most significant relationships they have within the sport because it's the athlete, it's the coach, and it's probably not the best word to use, but it's the most intimate relationship, I think, in terms of the closeness, the proximity, the conversations that you have, because the adjustments are always going to be adjustments. There's spotting, like in terms of maybe not intimacy, proximity then to an athlete, tumble coaching
Mm.
is perhaps the closest you're going to get because you are always going to have, especially if you're spotting high risk
Yeah.
skills, athletes are falling through the air. Um, and as a coach, you just catch whatever you can catch if you need to catch. So,
Yeah.
what, do you have any advice? What would you say to coaches for that kind of thing? Because it's
Yeah.
a tricky situation, and like so from my own experiences, I'll stand up with an athlete and spotting, I'll be like, and I'll have the conversation with every athlete. This is how I'm going to spot you. This is where my hand's going to be. And, is this okay? Does this feel okay? Because it's almost like I want them to understand the why of what I'm doing because I don't
Yes.
want it To be like, why is
Yeah.
he randomly placing
Mm.
hands here and there?
Yeah. So I think, one of the things I talk about when I'm delivering safeguarding training is that we're doing so many things in that moment when we're talking about where we're going to put our hands on an athlete, aren't we? Um, so we're doing an education piece for how they're going to be spotted, why they're going to be spotted, what are the mechanics of that tumble. If you've got younger ones, or if you're teaching a class in a class situation, you're potentially teaching them to spot each other effectively. So you're doing all of that kind of coach education piece. But we always talk about like it being life lessons in cheer, not just about the sport. We're also teaching potentially about consent, about body autonomy, about that athlete being able to say yes or no, and that's really important. Um, so when I start talking about this work, if someone's not done it before, I talk about exactly what you just said, Rob. You're saying to somebody, I'm going to spot you for this skill. To do that, I'm going to have to put my hand here and here. Is that okay? Um, because it might not be
Yeah,
for all sorts of reasons. It might be they just personally feel a little uncomfortable with that. It might be because they've been self-harming and they've got fresh cuts under a bit of under their leggings where you're going to put your hand and that's not comfortable to them. It might be that they've had former trauma or abuse that means they don't want to be touched in that way. And so one of the first things I always say is if you're offering someone the option to say yes or no, you've got to have an alternative. You've got to be a skilled enough coach to have some alternatives. So if you say to me, Joey, I'm going to spot back, walk over, I'm going to put my hand on your lower back in your thigh, is that okay? And I say no, you're not going to turn around to me and say, well, I can't teach you to walk over then.
no,
You well, that's it then. You need some other you need some other skills in your toolkit as
yeah,
as a coach to be able to say, okay, well, if you don't want to do it that way, could we use equipment? Could we use a barrel, or can we go back to drills and skills, or whatever it is? So you're giving people options. You're telling them, I'm letting you know it's okay to say no, and I have an alternative for you if that's the case. But let's assume that they have said yes. We're saying I'm going to put my hand here and here. The other thing that we're doing in the gym environment, where we're creating this open, transparent space with psychological safety, is we're if everybody has a good if everybody in the gym has a good code of conduct and behaviors, we're also teaching our athletes to spot red flags. So you've taught me that way. I now have somebody else come into the gym who's like, oh, by the way, I'm going to spot your walk over, and to do that, I need to put my hand between your legs.
mhm,
I know that that's not okay because I've been coached by you and you've said this is where I'm going to put my hands and this is why I'm going to put my hands there as well. So in that setup, we're doing so many things. We're teaching them the appropriate place to be spotted. We're teaching them to spot each other. We're giving body autonomy, consent, all of those bits and pieces in that. And I remember doing some of this training with, I had a group of American gymnastics coaches, and they got really hung up on how many times you should ask for consent. They were like, well, what if I'm going to do like the back handspring 4 times? Do I have to ask 4 times? And I was like, well, I mean, let's be practical about this. There's a level of assumed consent. If they've said once and we're going to redo the skill 5 times and we're going for the same place, then we can assume consent for that, however many times we're going over that skill. But if we're going to do something completely different, it would be appropriate to re-ask, because it might be okay for you to touch me on my back and lower thigh, but it might not be okay for you to touch me on my shoulder for whatever reason it is. And I think you build up a relationship with your athlete so that it might be, that not every week do you have to ask that because you've been doing that skill with them for a long time and whatever else. But it might be appropriate too, because if you've got a cautious athlete, maybe one week it's okay and one week it's not. And I think if you build the consent piece into the
so
language that you use, it's not a big deal. The American group were like, oh, it's so cumbersome having to say every time, blah, blah, blah. But all it is it okay if I put my hand here and here?
yeah,
It doesn't
but
have to be like a big deal.
also an athlete's life can change from week to week and day to day and hour to hour. So you don't know what's happened between them going home and coming back, between going to the toilet and coming back, or
Mm.
anything could happen over the course of a week. And I also think it's pretty cool about the code of conduct and the spotting culture, because there are only so many ways that you can spot a back walkover, really, and so like even like I do some work for BGU, which is building from the ground up, it's a qualification country in the UK, well, Europe now, actually. And I teach the Tumble qualification, and one of the things that we do there is we try to teach the same spot that will carry you through, for the most part, from level 1 to 5. And it will cover most things. It will cover back walkover, even coming forward, it will cover front walkover, back handspring, the exit from a round off into a back handspring. Like all of those things, we try to use the same spot because it's a really good way to spot, but also
Mm.
it's the most what's the word I'm looking for? It's the most transparent. Like it's so clear where everything is and why everything is being done. Like
Yes.
I have a bit of a thing about back walkovers. I think when I spot a back walkover, let's say you've got the hand and then you've got the leg. I have a thing about the leg anyway, not because partly because I don't really want to be there, but also if I have to help them kick their leg, then they're not doing it properly anyway.
Yes.
So if you can move up to the back and spot this way, then they learn to control the leg, and so it
Yeah.
works. It works, double good, to quote
Yeah, yeah, absolutely.
people.
And there's a huge move to try and move away from too much hands-on spotting because obviously they should have secured mastered skills leading up to that point, which saves
By
our back.
drills, which is why we should be drilling.
Yes. Yeah, yeah, absolutely. If you have those pre-skills, but there will be times when we need to spot. Um, and it's really about removing the ambiguity. It's about the transparency piece. When you talked about catching and how you catch on different parts of the body, um, and there'll always be that, saved your life, you didn't break your neck, but I accidentally like grabbed your boob or whatever it is. Um, in those moments, it's about us removing the ambiguity, apologizing, being open. First of all, are you okay? Are you hurt?
Yeah,
If I hurt you, um, to acknowledge that it happened. You don't have to make a big deal about it. Certainly don't make a coarse joke about it, although you might kind of, have a laugh that it happened if you have a good
that's
relationship with
appropriate.
the athlete or whatever. But um I the way I describe it, and I'm sure there are men who've experienced this too, but certainly women who are listening on the call, that moment when you're on a really crowded tube and someone rubs up against you, and you have that thing of going, is that because it's crowded and that was an accident, or did they mean to do that and I've just been assaulted? And
Yeah.
that's the feeling that we don't want our athletes to have. We want to remove any, did they mean to touch me there, or was that an accident? We need to be upfront with, sorry, I didn't mean to catch you like that. You were coming down. I had to, grab what I could. Are you okay? Are you hurt? Um, and if you think it's been really significant in terms of um where that catch has happened, or whether damage that might have been done to the athlete, reporting yourself in to your to your head coach so it gets logged,
Yeah.
so you've got a log that incident took place. um
I've
that
actually, yeah,
things are going to happen, right?
yeah.
It's again, it's just about that transparency piece.
I've
um
actually done that before. When I've been traveling and doing clinics, I've just sort of turned around to coaches, look, I've just I've just caught this happening like this. I want you to know that that has happened. But then I've also in one-to-ones, I've turned around to parents, and sometimes parents watch and sometimes they don't. But like I've turned around and gone, look, just this has just happened, like because even though, and a lot of the time, the athletes are, I think, better in those situations sometimes than I think coaches are, because like I'm always like, this has happened, like I'm being. Most of the time, athletes are like, no, it's fine, whatever, or whatever. But I
mm,
always, it's kind of like making sure, because you, you have to make sure that the athlete is okay with where they are, and how they feel after like something like that has happened. For the most part, they're just grateful that they haven't landed on their neck. Um,
yeah,
that's
yeah,
what,
absolutely. It is really important though that everyone in the gym's doing that same thing. um when you build that culture, then someone that's not, is
Yeah.
going to stick out, and if you're involved in helping manage your gym's code of conduct or behavior code for coaches, making sure everybody's aligned to those same principles is really helpful for the athletes because clear is kind.
Yeah.
um and where you get that transparency piece and kind of curating or narrating
Yeah.
what you're doing with athletes, it's an education bit as well.
Yeah.
But you don't, it means that like anything that shouldn't be happening,
Yeah. I,
we're not
I
narrating it.
no, well, this is
Why aren't we narrating it? The athletes like, what's going on? Yeah.
I try to do the same thing. So when I'm narrating or sort of monologuing with athletes about what we're doing, the amount of time I guess I'm going to move on to like words and phrasings a little bit here as well. But the amount of times I have to like correct myself when I'm coaching because I like so I'm always kind of like, okay, bottoms, glutes, and like don't say bums, like those types of things. Like it's just like I suppose it's because I want it to be consistent because I don't want it to be like I say bottoms to everyone else, but then to this one kid I say bums, and that's like inappropriate, you know? So that it's kind of like all these things where I always try to make sure that the phrasings are completely on the money and relevant and appropriate. So like lift your hips,
Mm.
squeeze your bottom, all those types of things, because for some people, some words are going to be more what's the word I'm looking for? Are going to be more acceptable than other words. And so
Yeah.
even down to the way that we're phrasing things, I think we need to make sure that we're not taking that for granted either.
Yeah. I mean, my feeling on phrasing is that, you know, I have this big bugbear that cheer coaches don't have enough anatomy training, that we don't understand enough anatomy. We should be putting ourselves through continued professional development to understand more about anatomy, and we should be using correct anatomical terms as much as possible. So, because we're a sport, right?
Yeah.
So, in sports science, if you've got coaches in other sports, they'll be using that language. I mean, obviously age appropriate, it needs to be that little kids understand what you're talking about. Um,
Yeah.
but you're using, and because there is also this, there's a really big push in safeguarding culture for parents to, for example, be using the right anatomical terms for children's private parts.
I actually
And
heard
the
the story
reason for
about
that
this.
is that if a young person has to describe something that has happened to them, if they've always used kind of, instead of using the word vagina, they've used the word flower, and then that child goes and tells another adult, someone touched my flower. That adult might not know that that's a serious thing and that they've, just been assaulted because they might be thinking that they're talking about flowers.
Yeah.
So, there's something really powerful about using correct anatomical language, both from a safeguarding perspective, but also from just giving credence to our sport as
Mhm.
well, I think. I mean, I don't think there's anything wrong with saying the word bottom or bum, if that's, like, if you're 7-year-olds or whatever. But I think you're right. Consistency is good.
Yeah.
Yeah, across that.
So okay, then let's talk about signs then, because you were talking about the situation there with a child coming in and saying about flowers and stuff like that. And so let's talk about signs that we should be looking for or that we should be aware of. Maybe not looking for, because we shouldn't be maybe trying to tarnish everyone, but signs where something isn't quite right. So we'll talk about signs of abuse later, but let's talk about signs of pressure. So
Mm.
I do a lot of one-to-ones. And so, like I said, I know I kind of get to know athletes. I could I tend to get quite familiar with how athletes are feeling, and I know where one session is definitely different from another one. And and this is kind of a bit of a Jeff Benson thing here, but there's three reasons why an athlete, for the most part, um, is struggling with their progression in tumbling, or why their progression in tumbling might be hampered, and that'll be because of themselves. because of a family incident or pressure from family, or because the coach is another coach, perhaps a team coach or something like that, is putting too much pressure on them, or even maybe yourself as a coach and you're just not willing to kind of see the truth in that. Um, what how can we be better here? Like how can we be better to support the needs of an athlete when pressure in a sport that is already really intense um is dampening their light for the sport, is affecting their ability. How can we be better, Joey? Tell me.
Well,
Hate me.
you know, Jeff is a good friend of mine, and I think I'm absolutely everyone should own his book, Unblocked.
Yeah.
The walls come tumbling down. And part of the thing that it goes back to coach education because I think the more self-education that we can do as coaches to bring awareness to ourselves about what the pressures might be, just that bringing of awareness is
Mhm.
going to make us more sensitive, more nuanced in the way that we might coach. And we talked at the start of this chat about that relationship between the athlete and the tumble coach, particularly if you're doing one-to-ones. But even if you're not, like you said, you're working on individual goals. There's an intensity to that relationship. There's an expectation that you're going to help them achieve what they want and whatever else that is. Um, but you are possibly in more of a position to have a conversation with them than others. If you're in a team, if you're doing team setups, it's very hard to talk. But if you're in a one-to-one, you might be chatting with that young person about all sorts of things while you're, in between skills in breaks or while you're doing things. And I think if you've got an awareness and a sensitivity to be able to ask them, just checking in how your day's going, making yourself available so that at the point at which they do want to share something, they know that they can bring it to you. Listening. If someone has something that is upsetting them or bothering them, that is affecting the way that they're performing, or in worst cases that there's let's say something happening at home that they need a trusted adult to share with, they're only going to share that with you if they already believe that you will listen to them. And that starts way before that conversation will ever take place. They need to know that you're taking them seriously and you're listening to them all the time. If they're coming in and telling you what they have for lunch that day, that you're listening. But to go back to the how can we, um what can we do, I really do think educating ourselves around some of the issues, what those issues might be. We don't know what we don't know. And
Yeah.
so I think reading books around tumbling blocks, doing some work around safeguarding education for ourselves is going to help us be in more of a mindset where we're perhaps more attuned to when something might be off.
I also think that because, you know, for me, one of my biggest red flags is when you see how a parent watches their athlete during a one-to-one.
Mm.
Um, and this isn't to tarnish all parents because I know not all parents are like this, but I think this is relevant to what we are discussing. Um, I've done one-to-ones and I've come out of them myself feeling drained because I'm like the parent was, and this is in my earlier days, and I just thought the parent was such a vacuum, and at the time I was like wasn't I didn't feel like I had enough about me to be like you need to leave. And obviously there's ways to do that, but ultimately I need you to leave the room. That is what needs to happen. And there's only I don't really have anyone watching one-to-ones now. Occasionally I do, but for the most part, I try not to have the parents watch the one-to-ones because I think sometimes the pressure of having the athlete be observed like that can be just as traumatic because we don't always know what's going on in the car, but the best example is getting in the car after a hard training session. The first thing you get asked is not did you have fun, but did you do your tuck today? And that just completely morphs the whole experience. And for me, I do, and it might be a bit extreme to say that's a safeguarding issue, but long term, that type of thing is not healthy for a child because it's this feel like they're a disappointment. They're they're not, they're wasting their parents' money, like all those types of things. They can lead to issues, and then those issues themselves can become safeguarding issues.
Yeah. Yeah. So I guess there's a couple of things I would say. The first is I would really challenge you to find, and you didn't mention whether there's anyone else in the gym, but to make sure that you're not left completely alone with athletes in
Mm.
the space because that is putting you at risk. So one-to-ones can happen while it could be that there's another member of staff doing another one-to-one somewhere, like, in another part of the gym or someone doing some administration, but that you're not left completely alone because with an athlete, because that does create a vulnerability for both the athlete and the coach. So finding a way to deliver that one-to-one where, I agree the parental observation can be a real challenge. So is there another way that something else that can happen with someone else um, in the space? Um, Absolutely should happen. In terms of the parent, it's funny, just before we had this call, I was chatting to Gordon from Working with Parents in Sport, who um, his his organization specifically is about um, how to be a parent of an elite athlete, or how to be a parent of any athlete really, but they do a lot of work around how to support elite. And we know that in sport, parents play a huge role in the culture that we create in our gyms. And as you said, that pressure that a parent can put on an athlete for all sorts of reasons um, is unhelpful. Um, Educating that parent as to what you want from, as to why you're doing what you're doing, why you're doing the skills progressions you're doing, why they may not be at the stage that that parent thinks they are, and helping the parent to understand is going to make things not only easier for you because you've not got them on your back going, well, I'm paying for my kid to get a back tuck, why haven't they got the back tuck? um, but also assist them, if you're saying that, parent, you and I, mum or dad, we're working together to support this athlete. The way that we're going to get to this skill the fastest is through these particular drills, through these formations, or these kind of confidence building tasks. It would be helpful if you can reinforce at home X, Y, or Z, and that might be exercises you've given them to do, or it might be around their confidence, so that you're gently course correcting that athlete, that parent, sorry, to understand that the behaviors that they're doing are actually hindering, not helping. So while you might not want the parent in every one-to-one, it might be helpful occasionally to bring them in and say, I want you to understand what it is that we're doing together. And you're actually teaching the parent, you're not teaching the kid.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah, no,
because that relationship, that triad is really important.
yeah. I, One of the things that I do when parents are watching, and some, some want to come in and watch, and the athletes are fine with that, and others are a little, I try to make sure that I record everything that I do off the athlete's phone or the parent's phone, depending on what's available. I try not to record on my phone, and if I do, I delete and recently deleted, so it's nowhere on
Mm.
my phone. But I try to record what we've done, and then what I'll do is I'll go through the video, although the new iPhone update is not helpful for this. I'll go through and then I screenshot where the problematic areas are and what we've done to try and help solve the problematic areas. And when it's athletes in your own gym, it's helpful. It's good because um, they can set up what you've been doing. It's not always as easy when you're trying to help people do stuff when they're not with you, but that's another thing. But it's always about I try to make sure that the parents, because the athletes are generally quite happy just that they're getting a one-to-one and and we progress. But with the parents, you want them to see the why you set up.
Yes.
And also, I also quite like it when the parent sees me spot. Like
Yeah.
parent sees this is the standard spot. This is my standard spot, and that's also, quite important to me as well. So like when they see the videos of me spotting, I'll say, this is my hand helping with the set because they lean into me. They need to stand up into a set. So I'm
Yes.
using my hands here.
The
This is
more we can educate everyone, the transparency of it, and just to your point about phones, because using video is a really useful tool for teaching, particularly on tumbling, because you can, I mean, there's loads of apps, aren't there? I used to, like, back in the day, I used to use Coach's Eye. I don't even know that exists
no,
anymore.
it's
You
gone.
know,
Should never have been allowed
gone.
to leave. Should never have been allowed.
Um, but you can sometimes an athlete can't feel what's happening, but when they as soon as they see it played back to them, they're like, oh yeah, okay, I completely, something connects in the brain and the body. um you
Mhm.
mentioned they're not using your own phone, and that is really important. That's another area where um, tumble coaches can be particularly vulnerable, is what you're not putting stuff onto your own phone. So you've not got images of children, of athletes on your phone, that you're utilizing their phone, and again being transparent about that. Or if there is a situation where for some reason you have to use your phone because you just want to show them back, deleting it in front of them so that they can see. And it's not just about whether they trust you or not. You are again demonstrating to them this is what should be happening in all situations. So if another coach comes in and is taking photos of them for whatever reason, they're going, well, I know that shouldn't happen because they're always deleted. So what are you doing? It's about bringing awareness. And obviously there's all sorts of things around storing children's data. Images and video of that child are their data. So you're protecting yourself. It's really smart to use their phones. Or if you're a big gym and you have like a phone or a device that you use there. But again, deleting that regularly so you're not holding loads of data. Oh, it's gone really dark where I am. Sorry,
Oh,
I've been
what
plunged into
happened?
darkness. The sun's gone in.
I didn't notice.
Right,
I
turn
thought,
the
what's
lights
happening
on.
here? It got very, very dramatic for a second.
There we
Um,
go.
that's better. Um, okay. No, thank you for that. I think particularly, I think speaking about that was really important because the easiest thing to do in cheerleading is to lift up your phone. And you're right because some athletes are going to be visual learners, um, and they need to see it. But then because the other two are going to be audio learners, they need to hear it. And then you've got your kinesthetic learners who feel it. And kinesthetic learners are great because I love drills. So if I can set it up and show you how it feels, it's great. But it's the visual learners that miss out, I think, because athletes that hear it can go and do, right? And the kinesthetic we've already
Yeah,
spoken about, but the visual learners, the ones who need to see it, and more people I feel are visual learners than anything. So like having to show them what they're doing and then show them the benchmark. You have to be able to do both. This is what I want. This is what you're doing. And so
yeah,
being able to do that is so important, but at the same time, just because that's important, it doesn't mean that you can sleep on the standards. And the standards are don't keep the content. Like once you've
yeah,
done it,
yeah,
unless I use content for my social media. That is what part of what I do. But even then, it's is this okay? Make sure I've got the correct permissions and all of that.
consent, and yeah,
Because otherwise, you can't just what happens if I shared this is close to home for me. What happens if I shared a video of an adopted kid? You know,
yeah,
that's that is so bad.
yeah,
So,
yeah, absolutely. And I think you, you know, we as um, cheer coaches, as tumbling coaches, we view movement body positions through a different lens to not everybody on the internet is viewing the images of a child in what particular body positions that we are viewing them as. And in my book, I talk about
honest,
how we curate how you curate imagery as a from a brand and marketing perspective that also safeguards athletes. And I think if you are a coach that is using material on your own social media because you're promoting yourself as a tumbling coach, absolutely you need to have the consents and permissions of the young people and their parents in order to put that on. But also just being really mindful of what you're putting on and why. what purpose is it serving? What's the intent of it? Is it appropriate? Is it helpful to do? Because I think, yeah, we live in an era where, like you said, it's so easy. We pick up our phone, we post stuff without thinking about it, and we are in a really privileged position, and we have a responsibility. We have a legal responsibility and duty of care um, to those young athletes in our care.
So I think that's a good opportunity to segue into the final part of our discussion, Joey. Tell me or tell us
Mhm.
about Squad Safe. Love this book. Um,
Um,
I think you can probably, well, not probably, you can definitely say more about it, better about it than I can. But before you do, I just want to say for myself, I remember reading this, and I think I even texted you as well. And I said, I feel so humbled because I felt like I was a good, I'm a designated safeguarding lead for the Ascension Eagles. I felt like I was doing my job properly. I had all of my ducks in a nice little row, and then I read the book and I was like, okay, so we're doing what we're supposed to be doing. However, are we doing enough? So yeah, please tell us about Squad
yeah.
Safe.
So thank you. So, I mean, Squad Safe started originally. The idea was I was never going to write a book. I was thinking originally that I might write, I don't know what it might be, a PDF or something to give out to coaches that was about all of the different kind of headings that go under a safeguarding policy and why you should have them, what's important, what does it mean, unpacking it. Sounds very dry. It was. And I kind of started writing that because I realized that coaches didn't have enough education, enough support in this area. The responsibility we have is huge, and whether you choose to ignore it or not, that responsibility is there. Um, and so I thought, oh, maybe I'll write something like that. And then I started trying to write. I realized you're only going to pick something like that up if you already care about safeguarding or you're already interested. Actually, there's a real hearts and minds to be won, as to the bigger picture, why we need to do this. So I kind of started initially writing an introduction to why you should read the PDF. But at the same time, for my own personal development, I was reading and going to webinars and courses and learning more about all sorts of things around sports science, sports psychology, female health, mental health. And I started to join these dots because, the cheer gym is the microcosm of life, right? It's all happening in there. Um, and all of these things all of those components go together to create either a culture that where our athletes can thrive both as human beings and as elite athletes. And there's some great sports science around how creating psychological safety, that same thing that we talked about, that creates a space where an athlete can feel safe to share if something's happening to them, also is that same kind of culture and environment that helps skills acquisition. Because if I feel like I can try something without fear of failure, without fear of ridicule, I'm going to go for a skill a lot more than if I feel fearful that I'm going to get shouted at or, have the mickey taken out of me. But there's a lot that goes into that culture. So, and I realized that really that is what cheer coaches, what we need to understand is all of those pieces, those components. And at times that can feel overwhelming, but actually the book sort of then breaks it down into, okay, I've now shared this stuff about female athlete health. We now know these things. What are some practical, actionable tips that we could do in our gym tomorrow that could improve that situation? If we're starting at zero, everything is of benefit, right? And loads of gyms as well aren't starting from zero. I will say, I've had there's one gym who bought a copy of the book for all of their coaches, and they've been doing it as a book club. And they were saying that they've been really encouraged by how much in the book they are doing. There were things there where they were like, oh, that's a great idea. We can use that and build on our existing best practices. But there will be some that haven't done or thought about some of this stuff before. And, particularly in talking about things like, we're a 98% female participation sport. In the book, I talk about the role of the menstrual cycle and the impact that has both physically on the female athlete, but also from a mental health dynamic, about pelvic floor, and high impact sport and the potential risks to pelvic floor. And I remember being in uh, a talk by Dr. Emma Ross from the Well HQ, which is an incredible organisation that promotes women's health and sport science in organisations. I went to a talk that she was doing, and I just sat there and I thought, oh my God, we're not thinking about any of this. I've literally never thought about this before. How can I have coached cheers for these this many years? All these girls that have gone through my program, and I haven't thought about this stuff at all. And then I thought, well, if I'm not thinking about it, probably other people aren't thinking about it. And then, I started a conversation with Emma about, well, if we are going to talk about periods, how are we going to do that safely? And that intersection between that and the safeguarding piece. So really that's what the book's about. And I don't know if I've given it a good sell or not, but it's actually a reasonably easy read. It's quite, I like to think it's quite engaging.
Right.
Um,
I can do that. That's
and
fine.
I hope people read it and go away feeling empowered to, like, right, I've got some stuff I'm gonna do in my gym now.
So firstly, I can vouch. Okay, I've read many books. All right, I'm a prolific reader. If I turn my computer around right now, you'd see my bookshelves. It is a very easy on the eye read. So if you're not someone who likes to take to reading or anything like that, you will absolutely
Not
be
a textbook.
you would be absolutely fine. It's almost, I don't want it to sound like I'm doing it a disservice, but it's almost conversational in the way that you're reading it, and it makes you feel like you're engaging, and your questions are almost asked and answered for you, and that worked perfectly for me. And like you said, the questions that were being asked when you were at the Wellness HQ conference, or sorry, the conference that you attended with Emma from the Well HQ, and you had this kind of bombshell moment with the discussion about periods. I had exactly the same thing. Chapter 4 blew my mind, guys. So chapter 4, and there was a bit about how girls were wearing sanitary towels because they were basically they were weeing themselves in practice, and I was just like, what? Like I had, and I'm even probably more detached from this because I'm a male athlete as well, and perhaps female coaches are more familiar with this than I was, right? But I had absolutely no idea, none, no idea that this was a thing, and I remember thinking like, how am I missing how athletes might be feeling? Because that there's a lot that goes there. They have to talk to each other and whatever, but it's still an embarrassing thing to happen. And so I can
Yeah.
remember, like I showed some of the athletes that I have, that I'm more familiar with, the ones that I've coached the most, the ones that I've known for the longest period of time. And I just said, look, can you read this for me? Can you look at this? Is this a thing? And they were like, yeah, this happens to me all the time. I was just like, this is an
And it,
important thing.
yeah, and the research that they did around, I can't remember now, I share it in the book, but what the stat is on professional athletes in high impact sports. So where they are jumping, so if you've got long jump, high jump, runners,
I think
um, say that again, sorry,
I think be a thing for this as well.
Woods.
Horse riding.
Yep. So where there is impact on pelvic floor, so your pelvic floor is supporting all of your organs,
Yeah.
at the base. Um, where there's high impact, consistently, unless we are doing things to strengthen pelvic floor, you're going to create stress incontinence. Um, and and I say unless you strengthen pelvic floor, but you can also over strengthen so that the pelvic floor becomes dysfunctional as well, which is what sometimes our athletes has, is actually pelvic floor dysfunction. And so they are peeing themselves when they're tumbling. Obviously there's lots of issues around that then makes that athlete feel uncomfortable. For a start, they're wet. um, they're going to smell, which is going to make them feel even more inhibited. They're not going to go full out on their jumps and tumbles because they're going to be fearful. So actually, you're creating risk, but you're also, like, they're going to regress in terms of their skills. And there's a couple of things to say on that particular point, because I know that was one that horrified you. The first is, it is fixable. It's fixable. So there are pelvic floor physiotherapists who can help support good pelvic health for athletes. The other thing goes back to coaches should understand need to understand more anatomy. There are exercises which we do which either help or hinder pelvic floor. So in the book, I tell a story about talking to a pelvic floor expert who had someone come to a girl come to her clinic, 14-year-old girl who was peeing herself when she tumbled, and she asked them to explain a bit about what they were doing she was curious to know what they were doing in the gym that was, maybe. And she was saying, oh, every session they had to do 100 sit-ups, and they were told they had to do 100 sit-ups every day. Well, if you're crunching and you're just squashing pelvic floor 100 times, but you're not doing anything else to strengthen, lengthen, etc., any other part, you're going she was like, no wonder. She's
Yeah.
like, I suspect everyone in your gym is the same. But from the coach's perspective, I bet they thought they were doing the right thing.
Yeah.
Because if you don't know a lot about anatomy, you think core strength is abs,
Yeah. It's
right? So you think, well, if they've all got a six pack, they're gonna be able to, hold themselves in the air or um support a stunt as a base better because they must have core stability, right? That's not core stability at all. Um, and so we could inadvertently be causing damage that is then going to have these knock-on psychological and physiological effects on our athletes. Yeah.
Yeah, so I was humbled and I was mortified. I was mortified because I was almost like you said, knowing more. I was ashamed that I didn't know. Like I was ashamed that my athletes who I care about and other athletes that I've worked with probably as well, which are many. Um, I was horrified that perhaps I didn't un not even perhaps I was horrified that I didn't understand their experience in a way that I thought I did. And that made I was sad. I was saddened by that because I thought I have such a good relationship with this athlete, and there may have been days where I'm like, why aren't you putting effort into your jumps today? And perhaps giving her a bit of a time about it, and actually maybe because I don't know, maybe that was the reason, or any other reason that I wasn't giving her enough reasonable doubt for. Um, so just I think maybe to kind of bring ourselves full circle and to close because we went on definitely longer than we said, um, was that I've loved talking about all the things that we've spoken about today, and I've really enjoyed it. And thank you for coming on. But particularly, guys, if you are watching and you've got this far with us and you haven't yet looked at Squad Safe, you should absolutely read Squad Safe because like I said, we do all of the things that we should be doing at AEC, and we're on the money, but it redefined the way that I thought about the way that we were doing the things that we were doing, and it made me think more about the just more about athletes in general. And I know I made the joke about chapter four a bit before, but it made me think more about the experience of young people and how we can be doing better to safeguard the way that they experience and engage with the environment that is a cheer gym. So I think it's a must. Get the book.
Oh, thank you. Thank you. Yeah, I'm so excited about this sport. We have so much potential to do so much for young people through it, and it's just such an exciting, dynamic sport. I just don't feel like, the sports science, the coach communication discourse, the things that usually go alongside other sports that have got more funding to do these things, it just hasn't evolved. And so we need to take it upon ourselves to do that self-education piece. And, I really hope that Squad Safe is my sort of contribution to supporting coaches to go and be the best that they can be because we're doing this incredible, so many tumbling coaches and cheer coaches in general are doing an incredible job and supporting young people in situations that where often they are that only person that might change that life, by listening to them, by reporting something, by you know making them feel confident where they didn't have confidence before. And that's such a privilege that we don't want to do a disservice to ourselves. If we can do better, then we should.
Absolutely. And I think that's probably a good place to close. If we can do better, then we absolutely should. Joey, thank you for coming on. I am so privileged to have you here. Thank you for being with us. And yeah. you want to say bye?
Thanks
Thank
for listening.
you. Thank you very much, guys. See you next time.